How do you know what is real? How do you know if what you're seeing is the truth? How do you know if your thoughts are even your own?
Mind control. The ability to exert one's will on another's. But I don't really have to explain this, do I? It's ubiquitous. If you consumed any amount of fictional media, you've seen someone with some form of mind control. Think of Professor X from Marvel Comics, with his ability to not only read, but affect the minds of others. It's a straightforward but terrifying power. The ability to not only decide your actions, but the thoughts and actions of someone else. So, is it possible in real life? Well, it just might be. Since we're going with fiction as the basis for our investigation, let's start there. To get a better idea of what mind control is and can look like, I've gone through many examples, and grouped them together. To start, there's a form which I will call puppetry mind control. Think of the Imperious Curse from Harry Potter, the Geass from Code Geass, or Brainiac from DC Comics. This is how Superman got mind controlled. And then how he got mind controlled again. And again. And again. Man, he should probably get a handle on it by this point. Although while doing research on mind control for this video, I found out that Superman used to have a superpower called super hypnosis. And that he was actually just using hypnosis to make them not realize Clark Kent is Superman. This is what happens when you write yourself into a corner. Glad they got rid of that power. Moving on, while not really mind control, or at least not what someone would think of as mind control, is mind reading. I still want to include it because it's often integral to how mind control works, and to the science behind it is interesting. What mind reading means, though, is very obvious. Just the ability to read what someone else is thinking, like Jean Grey or Anya Forger. The third group is what I'll call soft mind control. Think of the Jedi mind trick or the pushing and pulling from Mistborn. Essentially, you're not taking full control of them and are instead forcing a suggestion onto them in one way or another. The Jedi mind trick involves directly implanting a thought into their head, while the pushing from Mistborn more involves making them more emotional and therefore more suggestible. Some might not consider this to be mind control at all, but I would, since it matches my definition at the start, as a way to exert force onto someone else's mind in order to get the desired result. A weirder example of this version of a mind control is the signal from Kingsman and the Secret Service. While not giving someone specific commands of any kind, the signal overwrites everything else in someone's brain and pushes them to ultimate violence. This is soft mind control because the user could not detail exactly what the target should do. Instead, it forced them to commit violence, but how the violence was carried out was left up to the target. Finally, and this version is the weirdest one and also not very important to this video because, well, it's just not possible, is possession. This consists of literally entering the target's brain with your consciousness. Think of the mind transfer jutsu from Naruto, or if literally any horror movie. Or a really weird example is Super Mario Odyssey. I mean, you are literally forcefully taking control over those poor Goombas. Think of that next time you boot up Mario. Now that we have a better idea what we're shooting for in our search for the science of mind control, we can start looking. Let's start with mind reading, a very powerful and scary tool which forms basis. And then we can get into some truly terrifying things. The first thing I found while researching this is supposed psychics, heavy quotation marks here, who can already read minds in real life, and it actually is quite impressive. These people are able to glean seemingly unknowable information in mere minutes. Things like dates, names of family members, and sometimes even causes of death for loved ones.
His mom passed too?
Mm-hmm. My mother and father are both passed.
And one of them either passed by their own birthday or one of them passed by a holiday?
So that's it then, right? We found out mind reading is possible? Well, actually no. Not really. They're using a strategy known as cold reading. It's not actually mind reading at all, and is actually reading facial expressions, body language, and tonal indicators, which is used alongside a large list of underhanded tactics. In all honesty, it's mostly just a con to get people to believe in them. So how does it actually work? Well, here's how it often plays out. It usually starts with some form of modest statement about the supposed psychic's abilities, something along the lines of, "I can sense what someone is thinking, but only in vague terms and in snippets."
Sit down with somebody, I always like to talk about a little bit about the process, just to explain that everything I get is symbolic.
So, what purpose does this serve? You might be thinking that they're just trying to keep up the mysticism of it all, but it actually does more than that. It lowers the expectations of the target, making it more impressive when it does work out. This is important because cold reading isn't consistent at all, so the lowering of the bar can have real consequences on how effective it is. After setting up this baseline, they'll usually follow it up with some form of vague statement or question. I'm sensing a name. It starts with a J. James or maybe John. Let's take a look at the sentence and notice a couple things about it. First of all, I'm not saying anything about this connection to a J name, so the audience can make a connection to any J name they've ever met. Supposedly, a person knows around 450 people on average, so the likelihood of knowing someone with a name that starts with J is very high. Second of all, notice how I didn't commit to any sort of J name, meaning it leaves it up to the audience to fill in the gaps there. This happens very often in cold reading. The onus is usually on the other person to pick up the slack. Third, why did I go with J? Well, I just looked up the most common names in the US, and John and James were both in the top 5, making it even more likely that I am correct. Cold reading is very often about playing the odds. This is how some of those psychics can make those miraculous reads about a loved one's cause of death. If it's about a man, they'll often say something about the heart. Heart conditions are one of the largest causes of death for older men in the US. If the psychic makes a statement like, I keep saying heart. Is there someone with heart issues? With how common heart issues are, it will most likely be true that they know someone with issues like these. But say this vague statement doesn't work. What happens then? Say the person doesn't know anyone with a name that starts with J. Well, since we already planted the seeds earlier that it might not work, we can safely pivot away by dropping our statement and asking a new question. Cold reading often consists of a series of probing questions and statements, where you follow up with what lands and you let die what doesn't. For example, if they do know someone with a J name, great, you can continue down that path. If they don't, you can ask a different question by saying something akin to, yes, maybe not a J, but I'm getting something else. A soccer ball. Did you know someone who's big into sports? Again, playing the odds, as many people like sports. On top of all of this, cold reading relies on careful wording as well. People who use cold reading will never make solid statements that they then can't back out of later, kind of like a politician. Heh, nice one, BaldR. This kind of hot political commentary is what they come for. This is not to be confused with hot reading, though they both often work in tandem. Hot reading is when you go into the session already knowing things about the person by looking them up beforehand. By using both hot reading and cold reading, it can create quite a convincing spectacle. But that's really all it is. A spectacle. A magic trick. However, what really makes it not work for a mind-reading solution is two things. First, it doesn't work on any one person specifically all that well. Often, when done, it will be done with a larger crowd. This makes it easier for their vague statements to land. There are more people, therefore the statement will be more likely to be true for at least one audience member. Doing it on just one person can work, but it's not consistent at all. However, the big reason for why it doesn't work for us? Well, the biggest factor on if cold reading works on someone is if the person it's being used on wants it to work. Yeah, not great. If someone wants cold reading to work, they'll be more likely to make connections that give information away. But if someone doesn't want it to work, they can simply give nothing away, which means this really isn't the route. So let's move on to something a bit more concrete. So, this option is a bit weird. Even I understand that. And I'm a weird nerd who likes science, but I'm here to examine all possibilities. What if we don't have to read anything? What if we just know everything they're going to do before even they know it? What if we created an AI trained on a person's every decision in order to predict exactly what they'll do in the future? I mean, this is already kind of done. A way less intense version of this is used to give you your targeted ads online. It looks at what you've enjoyed, and it gives you ads predicting what you like now or in the future. But that's just not the kind of level we're discussing here. We're looking at if it can predict every move someone will make. Well, I'm not the only one who's asked this. Researchers at MIT created a learning model intended to predict a person's actions, and surprisingly, they found it to be semi-accurate. However, its predictions were limited. First, they tried to get it to predict what color someone would choose from a list, and then they got it to predict what move someone will make in chess. Here's what they found. Our results show that suboptimal human decision-making can be efficiently modeled with computationally constrained versions of standard search algorithms. Okay, that was a mouthful. I think they were intentionally trying to be confusing. But here's what that means. First, they called our decision-making suboptimal. Ouch, words hurt, guys. But two, they found the machine learning algorithm to be effective, meaning that in a limited sense, they could know someone's actions before they did it. However, we all kind of know that this isn't what we're after. It can't know many things that would require actual mind reading to know. Second, while it is kind of terrifying, it's more just good guesses than anything else. So we're moving on. And here's what a lot of you have probably been waiting on, using an EEG. An EEG, which stands for electroencephalography, yeah, I did have to look up how to pronounce that, is a medical device used to detect neural activity in the brain, which sounds like something we want. It works by attaching electrodes to the scalp. These electrodes are tiny little metal discs with wires attached which detect electrical signals from neurons in the brain. With these, it creates a graph, which looks like this. So, theoretically, if you put the electrodes in the correct places, you could decode what someone is thinking. And someone actually tried this. In this study, they found that they could identify what photo someone was looking at just from brain signals. So we've done it. We've found our solution. Just kidding. This study was found to be worthless. The people running the study didn't randomize the order in which the images were shown. Therefore, they could always predict which image it was just by the order. Always remember to check your science, kids. However, a different valid study showed a machine that could decode a word from a list of 5 from brain signals alone. It used something called a SBMI, a speech-brain machine interface, which decodes neural activity into words, as the name would suggest, which is a bit more complicated than you would think. This is due to the fact that the same signal does not code for the same thing in all people. The brain signal for red in my brain might not be the same signal for red in your brain. To counteract this, the SBMI has to get a baseline of sorts. What this means is that the person being studied will be asked to think of red while the machine is active, so now the machine knows what the signal for red looks like, and can now decode it later. Which is kind of incredible. The study that did this was published in May of this year, so this is cutting edge stuff here. The intended use is not really for mind reading though, but instead as a way to give a voice to people who can't talk, which is honestly just amazing. However, in my opinion, this isn't what we're looking for. As to work, the study used sensors implanted into the brain, which is invasive and isn't the external mind reading that we were imagining. Now, for the final option, and in my opinion, the best one, MRI. MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. How it works is, well, I'd love to say it's simple, but it's not. I barely understand it myself, but here's how it basically works to the best of my understanding. What an MRI is essentially looking at is protons, and you can think of these protons as tiny magnets. The MRI will create a strong external magnetic field, and the protons inside will align themselves to the magnetic field. This is the M in MRI. However, even though they're aligned, the protons are still spinning, and they're all spinning out of sync. The MRI will then send in an electromagnetic pulse. This will force the protons to spin in sync, and we can measure this spin. This is the R in MRI. This isn't actually what the MRI is displaying though. Instead, the MRI will switch off the electromagnetic signal and measure how long it takes for the protons to start spinning out of sync again. This is useful as different tissues take different amounts of time to get out of sync. The MRI then measures this at many different points, and that is what it displays as an image, the I in MRI. There's more to this though. By using a slightly different technique called fMRI, you can, as you've probably already guessed, measure neural activity in the brain. You can see which parts are more active and which are less active. We could therefore try and decipher what the person is thinking using this information. And would you look at that? I found a study from the Nature Neuroscience journal which attempted to decode the words people were thinking of from MRI scans. Was it great at it? No, it wasn't perfect, but they stated that it was far better than chance alone would predict. They also said that they got the gist of what the patient is thinking, more than the specific words. However, I suspect that if a vastly more precise MRI machine was used, the results would also be more accurate and more specific. Although this method was different, it still relied on a baseline in order to read more accurately, similar to the EEG, meaning that our realistic mind-reading superhero would most likely need to ask some baseline questions first before reading their mind, and would also need a very powerful MRI superpower, which is an interesting superpower, I'll admit. But we've done it. We've created a mind reader. We can call him MRI Hands Man, which, I'll admit, doesn't ring. Also, MRI machines are normally massive, so who knows how that would work. Don't think about that part too hard. We're not done though. So far we've only covered how to read someone's mind, but what about how to control it? Again, let's start with something that we see in real life. Hypnotism. No, not the super hypnotism power that Superman had. That's still dumb. But real hypnotism. Hypnotism allows the hypnotist to push the target to certain actions or to convince them of an idea, including many untrue things. Think of the Scooby-Doo episode where Shaggy gets hypnotized into being a courageous fighter. Or here's a quick example from Dr. Phil.
And how it would be if you were stuck to the chair completely. 3, 2, 1. Completely stuck. Try to get up. Get up! I've got some money here. Get up and take it. Zoya means life?
In Russia.
In Russia? Really? Did you ever forget your name? No?
Oh my God.
No, it's... How are you?
Good.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Lior, L-I-O-R. It means, in Hebrew, it means my light, Lior. What is your name?
How does a hypnotist perform this? Well, the hypnotist needs to get the person into what's known as a hypnotic state, a state in which the subject is more suggestible. There are many ways to get them into this state. The one I'll be discussing is known as progressive relaxation, as it is one of the more common methods. Progressive relaxation involves the hypnotist slowly asking the person to relax parts of the body, working their way up from the feet to the head. This makes sense with the name, progressive relaxation. They do this until the whole body's relaxed and the person enters a hypnotic state. Then, once here, the hypnotist can give suggestions, anything from convincing the person they're somewhere they're not, to convincing them they forgot their own name. So, how does it work? I don't know. But I'll go into some theories later, and it'll make more sense then. But in truth, this isn't what we're looking for. It's not mind control at all. This is due to almost the exact same reasons cold reading didn't work. It doesn't work on everyone, and of course, the person must want to get hypnotized for it to work. This is why I didn't give theories on how it functions earlier, because, well, some theorized that it's actually a very strong form of the placebo effect. This means many things. First, the person cannot be convinced of something they wouldn't already be open to, when you can't force someone to do or think anything against their will. 2, the person is in control the entire time, even in the hypnotic state. So if you see a hypnotist, don't be worried. They can't actually make you do anything you wouldn't want. So that's it? Just a dumb party trick? Well, actually no. Why? Because first of all, it's cool. That man just fully convinced that woman that she was stuck to a chair. And 2, it might actually have some medical applications. There is some research that it might actually help with traumatic memories or with drug rehab. Both of these situations work because in both cases the person will want it to work, increase its effectiveness. Even then, though, there's no guarantees. But now, let's look at something maybe a bit more serious. Deep brain stimulation involves planting electrodes in various parts of the brain. These electrodes can then emit their own electrical signals, affecting the neurons around them. The amount of stimulation emitted by the electrodes is controlled by a pacemaker-like device. It's hard to say exactly what you could get out of a device like this. However, with enough precision with each of the electrodes, you might be able to produce some interesting results. Maybe not complete mind control, but the ability to generate new impulses in the brain and block others. It could be quite powerful and terrifying. However, this isn't the best option for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's super invasive. I mean, you would need to perform intense brain surgery in order to get the electrodes into the correct places. Second, its effects are limited to the locations of the electrodes in the brain. And third, again, nobody really knows what kind of effect you could even achieve with deep brain stimulation. This is due to the fact that this is not its intended use case. Earlier, I said that it was connected to a pacemaker-like device, but the similarities actually extend farther than that. A pacemaker is intended to make sure the heart keeps beating along as normal, and that's what deep brain stimulation does too, but for the brain. Deep brain stimulation is intended to help with certain neurological diseases like Parkinson's, as all it does is disrupt irregular neural impulses. It clears rogue signals and makes sure the brain is moving along as normal. It was never intended to affect the outcomes of the brain. And finally, is focused ultrasound. Wait, focused ultrasound? How does that work? I thought ultrasound was a type of wave. Well, do you remember from physics class constructive and destructive interference? Well, the focused ultrasound transducer will send out many ultrasound waves, and then they converge and constructively interfere at one specific point, while destructively interfering or not interacting everywhere else. Thus, energy can be delivered to a specific point while not delivering as much to the area around it. It's not 100%, as some energy will be placed in unintended locations. But what's the point of using this method? Well, 2 things. It's non-invasive, as the waves can be sent from outside of the body, and 2, any point in the body can be targeted. This is actually used in medicine all of the time. Right now, they're researching using it on tumors, basically blasting the tumor out of someone. But as I'm sure many of you have guessed, if I'm talking about it, it can be used on the brain. We don't want to burn it like a tumor though, so we'll be using lower energies. And what we found is that by using various frequencies and amplitudes, focused ultrasound can not only increase neural activity where it hits, but also decrease neural activity. Take a look at this photo. Sorry about the resolution. It's a really good explanatory image, but it turns out the Focused Ultrasound Foundation doesn't believe in higher resolution. Anyways, in this top one, you can see the neuron became more active when hit by the ultrasound, and the bottom one became less active when hit by the ultrasound. The difference between the two is simply a change in frequency and amplitude of the ultrasound, meaning both can be done easily. So, is this it? Well, it's hard to say. Unlike deep brain stimulation, any part of the brain can be targeted at any time, and that part can both be activated and turned down. However, we currently don't have the precision to get any kind of results similar to what we're looking for. So we just don't know. And this doesn't allow us to force new signals to be created, just force more or less to be created. Now, remember the different kinds of mind control I talked about at the beginning? Well, this is why. I personally believe that focused ultrasound would allow for soft mind control, meaning you could activate certain parts of the brain to achieve certain results, such as turning on the emotional part of the brain in order to push them to make a rash action, like in Mistborn. However, it's not directly taking control of them. Do remember that this is just my hypothesis and no current studies have even tried this. What's not my opinion, though, is that what I called puppetry mind control is not possible in almost any capacity, so I wouldn't be worried about that anytime soon. So, is it possible? Kinda, maybe. Even my best proposed solution is still kind of sci-fi. Even then, it would almost certainly be far worse than in the movies, and our tech is nowhere even close to as precise as we would need it to be for it to work. That one study I showed about decoding neural activity into words, it had an accuracy of 34%, so we're not quite there. Also, to work, an MRI machine and a focused ultrasound transducer would both be needed. Who knows how that would work with a superhero? Ignoring all laws of physics on that, we have made him, Professor X, or his other name, Focused Ultrasound MRI Handsman. Yeah, we can workshop it. But, I wonder if you could also shoot sonic blasts with ultrasound? Man, sonic blasts and mind control. What an odd set of powers. Though, if we're staying with DC, you could just go with the Amanda Waller mind control route and just blow them up if they don't do what you want. This was BaldR, your online friend. Whoa, and here I am again, with some more final remarks. This one took even more time than the last, so if you could just subscribe please, or something. Anyways, I just wanted to share some thoughts about cold reading real quick. It's a super interesting topic, and I also wanted to share it so that you could be aware of it when it does happen, though I ask that you don't use it for any kind of harmful reasons, though you are my amazing audience who love science, so I'm not that worried. I just thought I should say that. I also want to reiterate that this is all honestly just kind of fun sci-fi talk. I wouldn't be actually genuinely worried about any of this. It's just for fun. And with that, I have to leave. These men in black guys say I have to look right at this weird flashlight thingy. Hey, what are you doing here? The video's over. Go click off. Hopefully to one of mine, but there's a ton of good videos on here. Okay, fine. You got me. This part is just so I could get to 30 minutes. You happy now? Now what are you doing? Dude, there's no secret ending. You can't be like, oh, I got the broom closet ending. Well, guess what? There is no broom closet ending.